Okay, how's it going? So this video is about insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is when your body is making insulin in a type 2 diabetic especially, but the glucose level is either rising or staying the same, but it's requiring more insulin to accomplish the same objective. So for example, we start off with normal blood sugar. Like it to be between 70 and 110 in a fasted state. And we like our insulin in a fasted state to be less than 5. But as we develop a problem called insulin resistance, it takes more insulin, here, the green, to accomplish the same objective, or that the sugar is tailing up. So this is something now that we can measure. There's actually some numerical stuff that we can do now. So we know insulin level times glucose equals insulin resistance, and then we have to divide over 405. That's where the number is. So I did some ones earlier, and so I'm going to be able to tell you what the values are. But we want this insulin resistance to be 1 or less. Okay? I do it the right way. 1 is greater than insulin resistance. Yeah. So this is what we want. So insulin level times glucose equals insulin resistance. So I did a patient's before the presentation, just so you know. So his fasting insulin was 10.3 and his glucose was 253. So we multiply those together, divide by 405, and his number was 6.4. Here are the ranges that are acceptable. Healthy is 1 or less. Early insulin resistance is 1.9. Significant insulin resistance is 2.9 or greater. So what we're looking at is now a mathematical way of calculating how much insulin resistance a person has. So, but we need to have this. This is the reason why I've made several videos on the importance of getting insulin resistance levels, insulin resistant level figured out, is because you need to have the insulin level calculated. So this is actually a patient of mine. His A1C was also high. And but his insulin level, his fasting insulin level, was already like there. And his glucose level was already quite high. So he has very significant insulin resistance. And so 10.3 times 253 divided by 405 is 6.4. So our significant insulin resistance level starts off at 2.9. So he's at 6.4. That's a major issue. So I'll get a calculator real fast, and I'm going to do somebody else's that I just did in the office. Okay, so her insulin level, get that out of there. Her blood glucose level was actually normal. It was 88, but her insulin level was 33.4. So that gives her insulin resistance. Let me do the numbers. 88 times 33.4 divided by 405 is 7.25. So we're back here. So normal blood glucose, normal A1C, her A1C was only 5.4. Insulin level, 33.4. So what do we have is, without this number, without insulin, we cannot figure out if the person has insulin resistance or not really effectively. But once we have this number, it's a simple blood test. Once we have this number, this is easy to figure out. And now we have a quantitative way of measuring it. So as a person is treating and working on rectifying their condition, we can now put it in a numerical formula. And this is just very helpful, because now we can give a person a report. Like they do like a calculated cholesterol and an average and HDL versus LDL calculation. But now we can do the same thing for diabetics, pre-diabetics. We can put them in this formula and see exactly what's going on. But this is the phenomenon. So you have your fasting insulin. Like we said, we want it to be 5 or less, and we want our fasting blood glucose to be between 70 and 110. I like it to be, 80, 75, 90 would be a high end, but acceptable still about 110 or so. So this is the phenomenon. It's taking more and more insulin to keep you normal. That's the resistance. Okay? So more and more and more. So insulin, when its effects are, when they're real high, when we have all of this insulin, this is a major problem. Part of the problem is insulin is a very powerful anabolic hormone. So what it's essentially doing is it's doing storage constantly. Insulin is like my Italian mother feeding me all the time. It's pushing. Eat more, eat more, eat more, eat more. And it's all of my muscles are full of glycogen. My liver is full of glycogen. There's really no more places that are active storage, so there's only one more place for it to go, and that's in body fat. So insulin's very anabolic. The other thing that happens is it's trying to pack away calories, nutrients, everything, but it also is anabolic to tissue. So when you have all of this insulin in your blood, it's anabolic to the lining of the vessels. So it actually causes the vessels to grow thicker. And one of the side effects of that is that you actually develop hypertension. So it's crazy, but one of the first symptoms of insulin resistance is hypertension. It's one of the first things that's going to get treated. But all of the things that we have attributed to glucose, so we said glucose damages the vessels, glucose damages your eyes, your kidneys, your brain, is also to be said for insulin. So even though this person here has a normal blood glucose, all of this insulin swirling around in the blood is damaging as well. And it is doing things because it's out of proportion to where it should be. So if insulin is in proportion to where it should be, it's not a problem. But when it gets out of proportion, then it creates problems. So we look at this model. This is the model for dysfunction and disease. And this is at an epidemic level. I can't even tell you how many people I've tested now that have never had their insulin tested, and it's way high. And, over 5, very simple. If it's over 5, you have insulin resistance. This is a simple, inexpensive blood test, and it is the canary in a coal mine. The insulin level's going to go up way before the blood glucose level goes up. So this is starting to go up. This might stay the same. This may carry on for a while. This may do that, but this may be even going more parabolic. So there's certain conditions like PCOS and stuff like that where this goes parabolic. So this person's sugar is still here in the normal range, but their insulin is just ridiculously high. So this is something that has to get measured. And right now in America, there's 100 million people who are pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic, and they don't know it. 100 million. So every third person that you see is this. Every third person is starting to do this. And the good question would be why? And some of what you would typically say is correct and some of it is not. First, it is bad food. It's too much sugar, too much high fructose corn syrup, too much junk, too much processed food. Absolutely, 100% that is part of this problem. But it's also a couple of other things. It's improper sleep cycles. So if you don't sleep one night, you can have 50% more insulin resistance than you did the day before. Just from not sleeping, just from having metabolic deprivation. So that is a crazy thing. It's a crazy number. But how many people are chronically sleep deprived? How many people in the United States are chronically sleep deprived? If you think you're one of these people who can get by on 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night, you are kidding yourself at the damage, at the expense of your own health. You can't. You can't. And I was one of those people. So, I know from firsthand experience, I was cutting a lot of corners that I didn't realize I was cutting. So, when we look at this, sleep is a factor. The diet is a factor. The frequency of meals. So, we are still in this model where you think you need to have 3 meals a day and 3 snacks a day. Every single time you eat something, your body is going to make insulin. Every single time. If you eat a carbohydrate-rich food, you're going to make a lot more insulin. If you eat a protein food, you're going to make a decent amount of insulin. And if you eat a fat, you're going to make very little insulin because fat is relatively neutral as far as insulin is concerned. So, but if you eat 6 times a day, if you're grazing, if you're having 6 meals a day, 3 like breakfast, lunch, dinner, and then 3 snacks, you're going to have all of these episodes of, let me see if I can get this on camera. I don't think I can. So you're going to have insulin, 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 insulin. And so that's the problem, is that you're keeping on pumping out insulin every time you eat. So the way that we handle this is we start to have less frequent meals. And meals that are structured differently. We get the person to start to sleep properly. I created a diet plan now. It's called Momentum. And the reason I called it Momentum is because it's the way your body works. When you start gaining weight, you continue to gain weight. It just seems like you get momentum in the wrong direction. When you start losing weight, you keep losing weight. And it's momentum in the right direction. So what I try to do now is create momentum for people to change their behavior. And so it incorporates the proper foods, it incorporates the timing of the foods, it incorporates sleep cycles, it incorporates light cycles, it incorporates all of these things that are part of being a human being on the planet Earth. So it's not just, don't eat carbs. Well, first of all, it's almost impossible, and you're miserable, but that's not even the answer. There's certain carbs you can have, and there's certain starches that you can't have. They're called resistant starches, and there's things that you can do that can actually help you get well way faster than just, avoiding carbs. We can incorporate some intermittent fasting. We can incorporate some regular fasting. We can look at our labs, our HbA1c, in a 90-day window, and see what's happening. So when HbA1c gets high, that is basically the oxygen carrying capacity for hemoglobin. So when HbA1c gets high, that means in place of oxygen, you have sugar, you have glucose, you have glycosylation, it's called. This is not a good thing. So glycosylation is damaging and deadly because instead of it delivering that full oxygen to your cells and tissue, it can't carry as much, it can't bring as much. So that's why the tiny little vessels in the eyes, in the kidney, and in the brain, and the toes, they get deprived of oxygenation because there's glycosylation going on. The thing is, it's measured in 90-day cycles because red blood cells that carry hemoglobin only live 90 days. So in 90 days, you've replaced all of your red blood cells. But if you continue to do the same exact things, your glycosylation product is still going to go up, 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 and you're going to create damage. So HbA1c, my number is 5.3. I don't like to see it higher than that. And I see people with, 6s, 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s. I got a call from a guy, he's 13. This means that the cells that need oxygen are not getting oxygen, and they are going to start to die. They start to break down, so you get death, damage, dying, diseased tissue. That's how you can get necrotic tissue. That's how you can get diabetic neuropathy. That's how you can get diabetic ulcers. This is how this process happens. But it all starts right here. It starts at insulin resistance. If we address this, we don't have to do any of this other stuff. And so we're not, though. The conventional treatment only treats the symptoms. They treat this. They treat this. They don't do anything about this. They only treat this. The problem is this happens first. This can happen 5 years ahead of this. So we're waiting for a person to get sick. This is not how we do it. This is not optimal health. This is why we have 100 million people in the place that we are, because conventional medical management is terrible. And it's just a simple blood test. So I tell people, ask your physician to do this test, and it's probably not strong enough. Tell your physician to do this test. Say, I want a fasting insulin test. There's another test called a fasting glucose 2-hour tolerance, where they give you 75 milligrams of glucose and they watch to see what happens to your insulin levels. And that's a great test, but start with a fasting insulin. If that one's bad, then we could do the glucose tolerance versus insulin. That's a great test. That's a functional test. But I already know what it's going to be like. Because if your fasting insulin's high, that means your body's sensitivity to insulin, its ability to receive that protein, is degraded. And that's because you've eaten too much, you've eaten too often, and you've eaten the wrong things. That's the answer. And then there are other hormonal things, like we said, like PCOS, we were talking about. That creates problems with insulin sensitivity. Other hormonal problems can create problems with insulin sensitivity. But for the most part, 80% of the time, this is entirely manageable and likely curable. In fact, if you get a person early enough and you just put them on a fast, they're going to return to normal sensitivity in a couple of days. It depends on how bad they are, though. So if they're in terrible shape, you may have to do really baby steps because their ability to tolerate that fast is very minimal. So one way that you know that you have good insulin sensitivity is that if you do a 2-day fast and you measure something in your urine called ketones, there's a little stick you can get that you pee in a little cup and you dip this in there. And if you're putting out ketones at the end of 2 days of not eating, your insulin sensitivity is probably good. Here's why. Your body can't get into ketosis if there's insulin around. So if your fasting insulin levels at 10, then you can't get into ketosis. Your body's still trying to store stuff. It's in storage mode. It's blocking fat from being burned. So ketones are liberated when your body uses fat as energy. So when you start burning fat as energy, it breaks off. One of these things is called a ketone body, and your brain runs on those ketones very effectively. This is a survival mechanism. It's a brilliant survival mechanism because, believe it or not, human beings are built. We are manufactured to exist in famine conditions over periods of days or weeks. We're not manufactured to have 6 meals a day and have the refrigerator be 15 feet away and to go from the couch to the refrigerator and back and forth. We're not made for that. So that's why we have this number, because we're inactive as well as overfed. And then you combine this with the poor sleep. People never go outside anymore. You don't get sun. Vitamin D improves insulin sensitivity. Vitamin D isn't a vitamin, it's actually a hormone. And then, the light bombardment, so our days and nights are mixed up. There's 10 components to fixing this. And when I mean fixing it, I mean fixing it so that it's not a problem anymore. The last bad thing that could possibly happen, and it happens way too often. In fact, I was in Walmart tonight and getting these markers. Of course, I went to go do this and all my markers don't work. So I went to Walmart to get markers, and I had a lady in a line. She's getting a prescription filled for metformin, which is an anti-diabetic drug, and insulin. This is the worst thing that could happen. Once you start to put a person on insulin, their ability eventually to produce insulin will diminish. And you have taken a person who is a type 1 diabetic and made them a type 2 diabetic and made him into an insulin-dependent type 1 diabetic. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes people get off. In fact, there was just some studies that showed these people on intermittent fasts, every other day, intermittent fasting routine, actually got off their diabetic drugs, and several of them got off their insulin. So this is just pretty recent. So you can get better. You just have to do the right things. It's not that difficult. It's simple, but it's not easy. So when I say simple, it's that it's obtainable, it's doable, but you have to be willing to do the work. And this is what this group is for. This is how I'm going to help you. I have a program, like I said, it's called Momentum. It's based on the work that I've been doing the last 2 years, the research that I've been doing, the book that I'm writing that's just about done. And so, but it's totally doable, fixable, and something that can be handled. If you don't handle it, if it gets out of control, it's so devastating to your health. Diabetics have way more heart disease. They have more strokes. They have more cancer. They have more of everything because that insulin is a driver of disease, as is that high glucose. And you can't just do this. If you're a type 1 diabetic, you can't just say, I'm going to have the cake and I'm going to have the cup of the ice cream and I'll just take an extra bolus of insulin. Don't do that. That's inviting disaster. We look at these numbers over 90-day trends, these HbA1c numbers. They don't lie. So if you're not managed, you're keeping your glucose high because you feel more comfortable there and you're a type 1 diabetic, it's damaging. It can cause real damage. So we got to get those back into that normal range. And over 90 days, you can see significant reduction in that A1C. There are supplements. There are nutrients. There are foods that are way better than other foods. I cover it. I talk about it. I've experimented with it. So all of these things are totally doable. But this is the model. This is what we have right now. So if you go to your doctor and you get your insulin level checked, and get your fasting insulin and your glucose levels checked, do this. Multiply insulin times glucose divided by 405. That's going to give you your insulin resistance level. Here's the value. So 1 or less, early insulin resistance is going to be 1.9, and significant is above 2.9. So if we catch you here, then we can bring you back here. If we catch you here, it's a longer road, but it's still possible. It's still doable, but it requires knowledge. It requires the testing. It requires this, this type of investigation. So that's it. All I've got for tonight. Enjoy your evening. Ask questions. Share the video. And if there's anything that you need me to cover in another episode, please leave it here. Also, if you think somebody else should be in this group, invite them and share the video with them. And I put my email address in and available for questions. If you're interested in programs, if you're interested in momentum, let me know. I'm going to start rolling that out pretty soon. I can do this via Skype. I can do this virtually. I can do this lots of different ways. I can order your labs. If you're out of state, I can order labs for you. So I can look at this and monitor this and get on the phone with you and talk to you and look at all the things that we're supposed to be doing and get you squared away in a relatively short period of time. We're talking 90 days could be a dramatic improvement of your health. So that's it. That's all I've got for tonight. Like and share. Enjoy. Take care.